Welcome to this edition of 10 Weather Chat. Today we are talking tropics.
Talking tropics, Cassie. I know you're just a little bit excited about tropical weather.
It's my favorite topic. When every meteorologist has a favorite subject, and mine is tropics. I'm from Florida. I grew up in this environment talking about tropical systems and dealing with hurricane seasons every year. It's kind of like in my blood. Speaking of that, though, side note, what's your favorite topic when we talk about weather?
Snow.
Snow's your favorite?
I'd say snow, yeah. Probably, if I had to say, probably snow.
Probably the biggest headache when it comes to forecasting.
Exactly.
That winter weather's a pain in the booty.
Yes, it is.
But tropical weather also can be as well. It's more like being stalked like a turtle, or by a turtle, is the way that people have described watching a tropical system come across the Atlantic Ocean. 2 weeks later, you're like, here it is.
Here it is.
Finally.
Well, we're going to come out of our shell today and talk a whole lot about tropics. Right there.
Get excited, folks.
Cassie's put together some incredible details and maps and graphics we'll take a look at. It does a really good job, I think, of explaining, you know, the hurricane season in general and looking back at the past and maybe a glimpse of what we're expecting this tropical season.
And this is just part one of our tropics talks. There is so much more that we can talk about. So we're actually going to have another episode of tropics coming up a little bit later. But for today, we're going to kind of focus on the very basic fundamental parts of a tropical season in the Atlantic Basin, because there are multiple basins where tropical systems can develop. The one that affects us is the Atlantic Basin, and that season begins on June 1st.
We have begun.
And ends on November 30th.
Right. And there's the peak, September 10th. So there's that usual lag, and we're going to talk more about this, between the ocean temperatures when they get the peak sun angle, you know, is during the middle part of summer, but the oceans lag and a little bit warmer later on, and it coincides with peak hurricane activity.
Now, I know a lot of folks at home, we've entered hurricane season on June 1st, but this is actually only the second year since 2014 that we haven't had a named storm before the official beginning of the season.
Interesting.
Because since 2014, all but one other year has had a named storm at some point before June 1st.
The season's gotten off to an early start, typically in the most recent years.
And there was a discussion at one point about starting the season earlier, moving it up a little bit because of that. But still, the highest percentage of storms occurs between June 1st and November 30th. So for right now, that is our official hurricane season.
Got it.
Now for the outlook.
Okay, here we go.
What is in store this year? Well, we have two major organizations that provide outlooks for the hurricane season. One is Colorado State University, and you at home may be like, Colorado? Incredible research facility there at Colorado State. Thanks to Dr. Gray, who has passed away, but Philip Klotzbaugh is taking the reins there, and their season forecast shows 23 named storms, 11 of those becoming hurricanes, 5 of them becoming major hurricanes, which are Category 3+. Those are high numbers.
Those are high numbers. I know we're going to talk more about that in a moment. There's NOAA's forecast, and look at the average. So to say that they're predicting a well above average hurricane tropical season is really an understatement, because Cassie, I think you shared earlier, these numbers, preseason numbers, if you will, just before, right at the start, some of the highest we've ever seen on the chart.
The highest number, which basically tells us that they have high confidence in an above average and a busy season this year. The busiest season that we've ever had on record was back in 2020. We had 30 named storms, and that season kind of got buried in history because we were dealing with, what was that we were dealing with? Oh, the pandemic and COVID. So it wasn't talked about.
There was that. Also some interesting weather going on there.
Also the busiest hurricane season on record. And you know, last year actually was a very busy season too. But all of the systems stayed out in the Atlantic. We had a couple make landfall in the U.S., but very few compared to what could have been. The reason for that was an El Nino that kind of shut down the Caribbean for business. So the storms really couldn't get close to us. That changes going into this year. Here are some of those factors, though, that are fueling that active forecast.
And these have been you made a great point with El Nino. The oceans have been warm, pretty warm for the last several years, particularly, right? Anomalously warm. But now we continue to have the really warm sea surface temperatures. That's the fuel which storms use.
Near record warm temperatures, the temperatures that we're seeing right now in that main development region that runs from kind of the coast of Africa back through the Caribbean, those temperatures now are as high as they typically would be during the peak of hurricane season, to give you some reference. So
running ahead of schedule.
Way ahead of schedule. So near record warm ocean temperatures, that provides the fuel for the tropical systems. The developing La Nina is going to provide a favorable environment for those storms to develop, and a little bit closer to home too. During an El Nino,
right.
you have high wind shear in the Caribbean basin.
Right.
And wind shear is not good for tropical systems. That's when we have differing wind speeds with height,
right.
or different directions with height, and that tears the storms apart.
Right.
A La Nina decreases that wind shear in the Caribbean Sea area, and that provides a more favorable environment.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. So they were trying to get going with El Nino last year, but then with El Nino, opposite of La Nina, it gets sheared apart. Now, as you said, Cassie, we've got the fuel and we've got the favorable environment.
So now you need the
Less wind.
systems.
Here we go.
And normally,
Yeah, now you need the systems, right.
and we'll go over in that second part of our tropical discussion, our next episode,
Yeah.
the typical development regions throughout the season.
Right.
But typically when we start the season, it would be near the Gulf, in the Gulf of Mexico,
Right.
or in the Caribbean, or
Right.
near the Bahamas, kind of closer to home.
Right.
And this year, we're expecting a very active West African monsoon season. So as we go through the season,
Right.
now, and then we start talking about those tropical waves rolling off the coast of Africa, the ones that come all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. The more of those you have moving into the favorable environment with lots of fuel to work with, the more storms you have.
Yeah, and traditionally, historically, if you look back at some, in general,
Yes.
there are some definite exceptions, but some of the strongest hurricanes on record have formed off the African coast, and with a lot
Long
of fuel, long track, and so that's why we'll have to watch that.
Yep, and that tends to be a little bit later in the season,
Yeah.
maybe in August, September.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, it's just something to watch. And now for the names. So let me just
Here we go.
give you the overview of how naming works when it comes to these tropical systems, because you may be looking at them and being like, some of those are really weird. So the World Meteorological Organization has designed 6 lists of names that we rotate through each year. So the 2024 list is the same one from 2018.
Right.
But there are 2 names on here that are new because
Yeah.
in 2018, the F storm, that was Florence, hit South
Right.
Carolina.
Right.
That one was retired. And then we also have a new name, Milton, for the M name because that was Michael, which hit the Florida Panhandle. We'll talk more about Michael in just a minute.
Yeah.
So these lists stay the same every year unless a storm is particularly impactful or deadly.
Right.
And then they retire the name and replace it.
Yes.
The World Meteorological Organization chooses these names from all cultures that
Right.
are affected by hurricanes or tropical systems in the Atlantic Basin. So
Right.
for those of us in the U.S., you see some of them pop up and you're like, I don't know how to pronounce that name.
Yeah.
Well, that's because it comes from a different culture. And the one that always sticks out to me is Isaias, the I storm.
Yes. Well said, by the way.
I've practiced that one a lot.
There's a pronunciation guide that you can see this online online as well. But we have to really practice those because some of them they may look one way and they're pronounced
That's not how
a
they are.
totally different way. So culturally different names. Alberto, the first one this year. We will never see Andrew. Just to hit
Nope.
home on Cassie's point, we won't see another Hugo, Katrina, et cetera.
Harvey.
Yeah, it goes on and on.
There's a
Some
lot.
of those notable
Katrina.
storms, as Cass said,
Yeah.
a lot of damage and fatalities, retire from the list. So
Yep.
get a new name for those.
We do. And there's also 21 names on the list. So
Yes.
we left out
Well,
did we leave
there's
out?
5 that are missing from the regular alphabet.
the Q,
Yep.
the U, and
Yeah.
the X, Y, and Z. We
There you
left
go.
them off because there aren't enough common names that do
Right.
that. Now that's 21 names. I told you we've had a season with 30 named storms.
Yeah, in 2020.
So what did we do? Well, we used to use the Greek alphabet.
Right.
But then we had multiple seasons where we had to go into the Greek alphabet, and you can't retire a Greek letter because it's like retiring the letter A. It
Yeah,
doesn't work.
right.
So the World Meteorological Organization no longer uses the Greek alphabet when we have exhausted our normal list.
Yeah.
Now they have a supplemental list of names that we will use if we go beyond this name list, and then they'll retire and replace those as needed.
Right. So it's not just drawn out of a hat randomly. They go ahead and have a supplemental list as well.
That's right. So that way we're prepared because so many of our seasons lately have been so far above average. And when we talk about retired names, this is another thing we're going to include in that next episode.
Yeah.
The letter I
Yeah.
is the most retired letter in the alphabet.
You showed me that. I think it was last week sometime. Don't doubt it, but it's always interesting to look at the data.
Yeah.
And see because once that kind of tells you a little bit. Once you get into that heart of the season, those F's to I's in that range, they can
Sometimes those can be the big ones.
big ones. So based on our the predictions from Dr. Gray at Colorado State, excuse me, and also NOAA, we could be down in this area.
We could be visiting Valerie and William
We could be
at some
potentially.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know a lot of folks also look at these names and they're like, oh, I know somebody named, we'll use Leslie, for example. Yeah, text your friends and family if they're going to be a tropical name this year. And of course, when we talk about Michael being retired, the reason Michael was retired is it almost wiped the city of Mexico Beach off of the map back in 2018 when it made landfall in the Florida Panhandle. There have only been 4 Category 5 hurricanes that have made landfall in the U.S. So we wanted to revisit those because there's only 4 of them. 1935, the Labor Day hurricane. This is before the conventional naming that we do now. So it hit around Labor Day, which tells you how late in the season it was occurring. And where you see that darkest red, that's where it was at its Category 5 status or major hurricane status. It made landfall in the Keys. Back in 1935, they obviously didn't have satellites and a way to see this coming. Over 400 people died because of the massive storm surge that came through those low-lying Florida Keys, and with no notice, folks could not get out of the way of that system. So that was the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. We don't have a reading of how strong the winds were when that system made landfall, but we do have pressure readings. And to this day, those are some of the lowest pressures of any landfalling hurricane that we've ever had.
And there are certain benchmarks. If it's a certain pressure, then you basically have a good idea for the wind speeds tied to that pressure, especially with recent storms.
And so next we have Hurricane Camille. This made landfall in 1969 along the coast of Mississippi. So on the right-hand side of a hurricane with this counterclockwise rotation, you get a big push of water, storm surge. We'll talk more about in the next episode as well. And so along the coast of Mississippi, we had almost 25-foot storm surge coming in with that.
2.5 stories.
Huge.
Amazing.
Huge water at the coast. Again, we're in the 60s, so not a huge heads up on this storm coming in.
Not at all, actually. Some, but not much.
Not much with that one. And estimates, because again, it blew away all of the wind measuring instruments. Estimates were around 200 miles per hour with some of those gusts coming in with that system. And then we have the inland impacts that come from tropical systems as well. Once Camille got inland and weakened back down to tropical storm status, that's that green that you see right there. It dumped over 30 inches of rain in the mountains of Virginia and the Carolinas, causing catastrophic flash flooding.
That's a huge impact with a lot of tropical systems. It's one thing, as you just said, storm surge, the high winds, the devastation it could create on the coast. But the inland flooding from tropical systems, they weaken, but they expand out, and all that moisture they've been carrying for all that way in the tropical oceans is dumped, and that's amazing. So basically a tropical storm just about into the Memphis area. And then kind of hooked around to our north and then went into the central Appalachia.
Not good.
Not good.
Which this is part of the reason why we're having this conversation today and why we're going to be talking about tropics so much throughout the tropical season, because you can have those inland impacts. We are impacted every year, every other year or so by at least one tropical system here in East Tennessee, or the remnants of one. So that's why we need to pay attention to the tropics. Not to mention, many of you have friends or family or property or like to vacation at the coast. So we want to keep you up to date with the latest info.
That's a great point.
Our third Category 5 hurricane to ever make landfall in the U.S. in 1992, Hurricane Andrew, near Homestead, Florida, on the southeast coast down there. Andrew was a small but super strong hurricane. They again don't have official wind measurements because it blew all of the wind instruments away. But this storm caused damage all across the southern portion of Florida, then went up and made landfall in Louisiana. Caused more trouble, and you can see just how strong it was throughout the whole way.
There's a lot of times there's that Florida-Louisiana connection. Seems like.
Once it gets in the Gulf, it has to make landfall somewhere because there's no way out.
That's a great point.
So that's what you don't want storms in the Gulf.
Big bathtub. It's got to exit out somewhere.
And it's hot in there too. Hurricane Andrew also struck in August, and the reason I wanted to bring that up is because that was the A storm. So that was the very first named storm of the 1992 season.
Not until August.
Not until August. And it was a Category 5, the very first storm right out of the gate. They only had 6 named storms that year, 7 systems developed, but 6 officially named. And that's why it's so important for people along the coast to prepare. It only takes one.
It only takes one.
So if you only have 6 named storms and one of those happens to be a Cat 5, that's a life-changing event for you.
The season was relatively quiet otherwise, or inactive, or a weaker season. But everybody, 1992, all you know and remember is Andrew, and that did it.
Big one.
Interesting. You made a great point. What we have to watch out for is the inland track of future tropical systems for heavy rainfall, maybe even some high winds. Y'all remember Opal in '95? That was impactful for. it was still decaying tropical storm right into the southern Appalachians.
Right up into here. And with Andrew also, Andrew was a big proponent of changing building codes.
Yes.
Because after Andrew came through and tore off the roofs of every house in the area, building codes changed down in Florida because of that system coming through. So now we bring it up to 2018, Hurricane Michael.
Right.
This storm, when it made landfall, was categorized as a Cat 4.
Yeah, initially.
Initially, but then in post-analysis, they went back and upgraded it to a Category 5 with maximum sustained winds of 161 miles per hour. It made landfall in the Panhandle of Florida.
Wow.
The strongest hurricane to ever make landfall in the Florida Panhandle, because this area, because of just the way the curvature is, it actually doesn't get hit that often by super strong storms.
Great point. A lot of you may vacation in that general area.
Destin, Panama City,
38
all of those.
area and all there.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, this is one thing that impresses me too, particularly about Camille. We know the devastation that Michael did.
Yeah.
Mexico Beach, again, as you said, it basically just wiped everything, flattened everything, cleaned it. 9 to 14 foot, storm surge, right?
Yep.
And of course the high winds and that's impressive. I mean, go back to Camille's 25-foot storm surge.
And then let's go one further with this, because we're just getting really excited. Katrina. Category 5 in the Gulf of Mexico, but not a Category 5 when it made landfall.
No.
It was a Category 3 when it made landfall. And it brought over 30-foot storm surge to the Gulf Coast. Still to this day, the highest that we've had recorded in that area. But that was not a Category 5. And that's why it's also important. We're talking about the Category 5s because there's only 4 of them. They're easy to remember and very historic to talk about. But there have been storms that are not major, or not even major hurricanes, that have brought such impacts to areas that those names have been retired as well, which is also why it's important not to dismiss a system based on its category.
Excellent point. I'll remember we were camping that particular weekend when Katrina was in the open waters of Central Gulf, and we took a TV because 2 reasons. I wanted to keep an eye on the weather, and also a friend of mine wanted to watch a NASCAR race in Bristol. But anyway, I remember turning it on. I think it was that early Sunday morning. I remember seeing it was in the Central Gulf. Katrina was 175.
And a huge storm.
Humongous.
Monstrous hurricane.
It was. The eye was perfect. It was huge. 175. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is not good. It's a Cat 5. It weakened slowly. But once it got up to that strength, all that water, all that energy was going to be expended right along the Gulf Coast. So as Cass said, it didn't really matter. Once it got that strong, it was bringing damage to the Gulf Coast. Anyway.
And it was the same thing we were talking about with Hurricane Charlie making landfall down near Punta Gorda in Florida. That was a small storm.
Oh, yeah.
It was a Category 4.
Yeah.
Huge storm surge coming into that area as well. So
I know that very well. That's
the 2004 hurricane season. Oh my gosh. That was 4 storms in 6 weeks in Florida. I was in school at the time, and I did not have school for an extended period of that time. And I went to school for a week without power at my house because school had power, but my home didn't.
That's memorable. I'm still amazed how Charlie did that little
hook.
Little hook. Sometimes weather systems tend to, quote unquote, fill the land, topography. That's, the kind of path of least resistance. I don't know, but just you look at that track and it's like, oh, here's the water right there.
Yep, that little hook on into the right.
Amazing.
So many, and the way we talk about these storms is like we know them personally, because they each have individual characteristics that you remember, and that's the other thing to remember about tropical systems. We can't compare one to the next because the impacts are going to be different in some way. Because every storm leaves a different footprint.
Great point.
Even if it makes landfall in the exact same place with the exact same wind speed, it's going to have a different type of impact than the previous one did. So every tropical system is different. You've got to get prepared now for the season. If you have friends and family along the coast, get your emergency supply kit together. Figure out your evacuation routes if you do live along the coast. Learn the terminology. We're going to be going over that with our second episode as well. And just in general, become familiar with the tropics, because once they ramp up, that's not the time to start learning. You got to know before you go.
That's exactly why we're doing this segment now. You mentioned friends and family. I had a brother who stayed inland, just barely, in Charleston when Hurricane Hugo came in. It actually, thankfully, made landfall just north of Charleston. So it was somewhat safe, but had to go through that experience of all the wind, and I've heard from others who've lived or stayed in a hurricane, he said he'd never do that again.
Nope.
Now, he ended up being safe, but here's the key. Do you want to have to endure all the wind for a long period of time? So if you have friends and family who live in coastal areas, and maybe you may be, they think about, I think we're going to ride it out, I think we're going to stay. Tell you what, particularly the stronger the hurricane, it is best to just get out of harm's way and not try to ride those things out. And if you are on vacation and a system's coming, this is another reason. You need to know.
This is why we want to talk about this, because if you are going to an area that is affected by hurricanes, the first group that they're going to want to get out of there are the visitors, because you don't have a safe place to be, and they don't want to have to be dealing with you while also taking care of their own residents. So when in doubt, just go, just evacuate. My parents, my whole family lives in Pinellas County in Florida. That area is every year ends up in the cone multiple times. And it always gets scary, and I have to forecast for them. They've been very lucky to not have a direct impact since I believe 1931. Knock on wood. For Pinellas County, 1921, I think, in northern parts of the county. But we've had a lot of close calls. So it's just important to remember you got to evacuate if it looks like a system could affect your area. We will have episode 2 of the tropics. That was just part 1. We have so much more to talk about with the tropics. We'll be dropping episode 2 coming up in the next couple weeks, but that should at least get you started with the fundamental basics of the tropical season.
Very good. Thank you, Cassie. Thank you for joining us.